This is a production of Cornell University.
Great. Okay. Welcome to #MariGoals, using social media and having a niche market, which is what I've been doing. I'm Caitlin Mathis, and yeah, I have the Marigold Gardens, and it's in Ithaca. And let's go. So the Marigold Gardens. It's a very small boutique flower business where I grow exclusively marigolds. I've been working for Plenty of Posies, which is a 4-acre flower farm in Newfield, New York, for about 5 years now. And 2 years ago, I was struck by a passion for marigolds out of nowhere. In 2020, I decided to experiment and grow 15 varieties. Just for kicks. But also that summer, I read an article that Joan Thorndike had written for the ASCFG newsletter. And in it, she'd put a call out to East Coast growers to start growing marigolds because she could not keep up. She's in Oregon, and she couldn't keep up with the high demand. And she was getting all kinds of requests from the East Coast. So we here on the East Coast need to be growing marigolds. My boss at Plenty of Posies told me to get growing. And the next year I did about 40 varieties of marigolds for my first official season as the Marigold Gardens. And I know we're all getting excited for the next season to grow and for all this ice to be done. And I think it's looking about 53 varieties for 2022. So what is great about having a niche market? There really is a community for whatever niche you find yourself in. I have been blown away by the Marigold community. There are mentors and customers ready to exalt whatever that niche is. And I have found so many people through social media. That's the way to find these people. Actually, I think I've met Hannah through social media first.
I think so, yeah.
So like I mentioned, Joan Thorndike of Lamera Gardens. I also put everybody's handle on here if anyone's interested in following any of these people. But I met Joan Thorndike through social media, and then had written her an email and received like a 2-page email in response, how to grow, things, people to contact, just enthusiastically supportive, amazing person. Then I was contacted by Liz at Uber Herbal, which is another exclusively, well, she grows herbs and she grows marigolds, and she focuses on garlands. And she told me the year before she had done a wedding in Ithaca for 40 garlands. She had shipped them from Oregon. So now she and I are referring to each other if somebody has an inquiry on the West Coast or somebody's out here, she'll send them to me. And then also out of the blue, through social media, Pamela Arnosky wrote to me, who is Arnosky Family Farms down in Texas, outside of Austin. Arnosky Family Farms was one of the first flower farms to boutique grocery store sellers in the United States. And they grow a huge amount of marigolds. And this past year, they had their first Marigold Festival. So she wrote to me and she invited me down there, and in true Texas fashion, like her messages were full of, ain't nobody got time for that, and you got to plant them this way, and don't waste time with those soil blockers. So it's just been really, the community is there. Another great thing about having a niche market is that you can feel like you're doing one thing well. So if you have a serious passion and limited resources, and you have a lot of competition, which is stuff that we all do, it's so helpful for your business's health and your own mental resilience to have a niche. Just to know that you are doing one thing well. Or you can have a niche within a niche, or a super niche, if that's something. I think that my super niche is going to be growing a huge variety of marigolds. It may not always be the strongest stem marigolds in the business, but I think maybe I can get behind my super niche of having a lot of variety. In terms of a niche and social media can be a lot about likes and validation that way. And it's great to have a niche where you're creating something and the pressure's off from having it have to be universally appealing and, no problem there. You're a niche, you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Also, having a niche builds in this idea that this is a specialite, and it's invigorating to know that you're creating something that is somebody's go-to for this one specific thing for fans. Okay, about social media. So I put the big four up here. There's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. A little bit today, I'm going to be talking about Instagram, and I'll tell you why. TikTok is the newest big social media thing. It's a video-based platform. It's very young, and it's very cool. And I don't know if I'm really that cool. I think I could get behind TikTok, but maybe I just don't have time. Instagram we'll talk about. Twitter is word-based, and Facebook is complicated. I think Facebook is a little tired, or it's not quite as hip as it used to be. And I'm finding that most of my desired online community is through Instagram. Now, Instagram is a primarily visual platform, which is great for flowers. It does have video capabilities, and I'll talk a little bit about Instagram's push towards video content a little later. But if you're wanting to make videos, it's a little less, there's a little less need to go and learn through TikTok. And it's easy to do on your phone. Make some content and put it out there. If anybody is on Instagram and you want to see what, I'm going to share another part of my screen. It's a mobile app, so you don't usually look at it through your computer, but this is my Instagram page and my feed. And you can see rows and rows of marigold content, lots of orange. And let me go back to this. So my handle is at the Marigold Gardens if anybody wants to follow along. Okay, so let's talk about content a bit. First and foremost, who is your audience and who do you want to connect with? This is the main reason that I'm on Instagram. It's that you'll find that a lot of the people that you're connecting with are fellow farmers, florists, some of your customers, other creatives, or other accounts that have to do with sustainability or social justice, or local accounts that you want to connect with and build that community. And then you have to decide what you want to convey. I find it's really helpful, it's kind of a marketing thing, is to choose a bunch of words that you want associated with the kinds of images you're putting out there. So back when I first started my account, I decided kitschy, beauty, energy, and celebration would be my go-to words for this. And they're a little bit reflective of my own style. And they're also, I think marigolds are a little bit like that anyways. They have a little kitsch to them. They're an undervalued flower, in my opinion. And and definitely associated with energy and celebration, and I think beauty. So how frequently do you post? Before, this is definitely a personal preference. I was scared by a friend who's quite in the know when she said, you're going to have to post every day. And it's really up to you what your level of effort is going to be, how frequently you post. The key, I think, is to be consistent, and maybe not constant. You don't want somebody to, I would say 2 posts a day is maximum, and you don't want somebody to be muting you because they're just like oversaturated with what you're doing. And then variety of photos. So I went to a similar talk by the Yukon Cooperative Extension and about social media. And Yoko Takamura from Osawaga Farms in Connecticut. They're a vegetable farm, and they have the most followers on Instagram of any farm in Connecticut. So she was talking about the kinds of variety that she includes in their feed of the photos. So people respond really well to seeing who's farming, seeing our faces, pets, doggies, works in progress, field shots, collaborations, points of interest. They grow a lot of varieties from Japan, and they do a yearly trip to Japan, so they always include their shots from their travels. And then lots of beauty. And even if you have an old phone, horrible phone, or you feel like you don't have any artistic instincts, there are filters that you can slap on all those photos and make them beautiful. Just go ahead, don't be ashamed, just put a filter on it. And then also hashtags. So you can follow hashtags on Instagram, which I highly recommend. And then if you tag your photos, it will increase your following. I have hashtagged this part of the presentation, hashtags goals 2022, because I do not do this yet. I should do this, and I just have not. All my hashtags have been puns, and I follow hashtag marigolds, I follow hashtag Chempazuchil, but I will start hashtagging my account. Okay, another thing to think about is how are you using the stories function? You can share a niche adjacent content and use it to sing the praises of other people's work. And that really is how a lot of networking through Instagram happens, is by actually saying to somebody, I really like what you're doing. You know, it's a system of reciprocity, I think. So do reach out to people and let them know that you like their work. Do collaborate if possible. If you lift up each other's accounts, everybody wins. A good tag, somebody will see that, they'll start following you. Their other customer will say, oh yeah, I'm gonna start following them. Some really good advice that I got was find 5 creatives whose work you really admire, and then try to collaborate with them in some kind of way. And once that happens, also bring it into real life. Send them a card, send them a garland, or a t-shirt, or a tea towel. So can you use Instagram to sell? Yes, definitely. I saw Instagram being highly successful for visual artists and vintage retailers, and I thought this could work for flowers. So if your product is shippable, you can have people place orders through direct message, or you can use the platform to announce when something is for sale locally, if there's a pickup happening somewhere. Okay, turning it into IRL. So just as an example, this picture here, this was like the highlight of my year. There is a wonderful florist named Sue McCleary who I have watched for several years just create these amazing works. And then I just shared with her that I enjoyed what she was doing. She saw that I was growing marigolds, and she happens to be a huge marigold fan. So she asked me if she could place an order. And I said, of course. And we became friends. And she ordered 500 blooms from me that I shipped out there. She lives in Detroit. And it turns out that she is working on her second book. These marigolds, this installation is in the book with a tagline that says Marigolds by the Marigold Gardens. And now I'm looking forward to meeting her in real life at the Slow Flower Summit this year. And it's just a really good example of how social media can work out for you. And then I just wanted to talk real quick about my niche, which is marigolds, just in case anybody came here for some real good marigold content. The quick story, the origin story about marigolds is that it was a young Aztec couple. They started friends and then they fell in love as they got older, and one of them went off to war and died, and then the sun god transfigured them into the hummingbird and the marigold to reconnect them after death. So that's why the marigolds used a lot in Dia de los Muertos to call your loved ones back to you. So around the 1500s, the Portuguese conquistadors put marigold seeds in their pockets and ended up going to India. And that's how the marigold traveled to India. And then from there, all over the world. And I could talk a long time about marigolds, but I just wanted to also say that this year, one of the things that I love so much about the marigold, or like having this niche market, is that I get to push just how far this one variety can go. So I made garlands. Most of my sales this year were garlands, both fresh and dry. It's great to have a product that doesn't lose its value. It's great fresh, then you can sell it dry, or you can get super tired of it and toss it in the compost. That's really the whole lifeline of it. I did some pop-ups where I sold bouquets, some confetti for weddings, some wearable hat things by the bloom to florists, quite a lot for botanical dyeing. For baked goods, marigolds are edible. And then I did some pick your own, and most of the pick your own was trades for weeding. So somebody would come out, do a little weeding, and they could just take what they wanted. And then I did a little trading locally too. I ended up trading a garland a week to a local Indian restaurant, and I got a meal every week, and that was just the best trade of my life. Really the dream. So what attracted me to marigolds is that they're super robust and so easy to invest in, fast to grow. I think it's 54 days from seed to bloom. So fast. I really felt like this flower was needed a champion to sing its praises. And it has an amazing ability to stay fresh and vital looking out of water for days, which I don't know any other flower that does that. It's low investment cost, and I love their connection to energetic and joyous celebrations and movement through life's different trials. There's plenty to explore with marigolds and to celebrate and share via social media. Any questions?
We've kind of run out of time on this one, so we'll hold any questions. I haven't gotten any in the chat, so we'll hold. If we get any people, please feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end of the session, if we have time, we'll do some more questions then. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thanks.
That was great, and I'm dying for spring now.
Yes,
More than I was.
awesome.
So if you'll stop sharing, we'll get Hannah on.
All right, so Hannah Volpi, Foxi Flora is my business. I love marigolds. I just want to say I love Caitlin's whole style. Everything she brings, it's so great. You make Instagram so much fun. And yeah, I just love following you and I love being part of the flower community with you. Seriously. So I wanted to do a presentation about soil as the soul of your garden. So I'm going to talk a lot about, obviously the science of soil, but there's so much about soil that is still so spiritual and unseen, and it's just the source where so much magic happens. It's truly the beginning of everything and the end of everything as well. So it's just like this really magical, amazing topic. And the power of a resilient garden, a strong garden, any growing area lies in the priority of healthy soil, and understanding that that's not something that happens overnight, and in that it's a constant process. When you grow, you have to put that. So everything's always changing, and it's the dance between it all. So I wanted to just go through obviously all the basics of what healthy soil is, and just, this conversation might seem redundant, but because there's lots of different angles to take with discussing soil and environment, but it's really not bad to be redundant in the different lists and criterias, because soil is all connected. There's like all these different parts that you want to make sure that you're understanding, but they're not the same. It doesn't have the same power unless you understand them all together. So this is just like some, more like personal like compliments to soil, is really the long game. It's where the life cycle of a plant and all different microorganisms begin, but then it's also where things decompose and at the end and give back to the earth. It's the strength of structure, so it actually holds space and holds container for things to grow in, but it has this softness where it also provides like this beautiful nurturing environment. It's a home to reside, but the heart to fulfill life. Like there's just so much expression that comes out of soil in a garden. It's absolutely our planet's life support system. And I love to make metaphors with soil, especially to bring in people who don't have a garden or don't have like the mindset around growing, to try and, like catch that maybe they can, tie in their own niches and their own styles of whatever their career is, to like help them understand. So, like mindset, a healthy soil is like a healthy mind. So your thoughts lead to emotions, which leads to healthy behaviors. Just like in soil, healthy soil, you're not going to be able to get healthy growth without a healthy environment.
Hannah, are you advancing? I mean, because it's not advanced. So we're still on the first slide. If you've gone to the second.
Yeah. Okay, I can move faster. Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't have to move faster. We haven't moved through, so I didn't know if you'd gone to the second slide yet.
No, I'm still just chatting it up here on the
because I can't read them. So sorry.
I did it. Okay. And I, like a healthy body, there's just components of being strong and resilient. I always like to say, like I'm Italian, making sauce, the individual components of a great sauce are all important, but it wouldn't be the same if they weren't all together. Same with baking, the mechanics of a car, like it's all just, everything is always stronger connected. So, and I just love this quote, Charles Kellogg: "Nature has endowed the earth with glorious wonders and vast resources that man may use for his own ends. Regardless of our tastes or our way of living, There are none that present more variations to tax our imagination than the soil, and certainly none so important to our ancestors, to ourselves, and to our children. So it's a lifelong thing. It's not like you can just set up soil and forget it. And it's like, okay, cool. All right, next slide. So on a very simple level, soil is minerals, organic matter, water, and air, right? And then there's different ratios. Healthy soil is sustained productivity. So knowing that it's always going to be evolving and you always have to be paying attention, and that system approach. So managing all the different components to continue to create a sustained, strong environment. And soil tilth, right? So managing fertility, balance nutrients and pH, support soil tilth, nurture microorganisms. So soil tilth basically being like that, like the thing that you can see the most clearly, right? So the suitability of raising a crop. I won't go through all the list because I feel like I stayed on that first slide talking about the spiritual soil for too long. So what makes healthy soil, right? The collection of microorganisms fixing nitrogen, right? Storing a lot of just nutrients and minerals all the time. These heavy eating microorganisms still also decomposing, like the organic matters to help be able to provide food for the plants and other animals. It's like the thing about our planet that sets it aside from other planets in the solar system. And it's just this, robust living system. It's all, but like the timeless, like patience and resilience for the long haul. There's some people say 3 types of soil, some people say 4, but there's 6 types of soil: clay, sandy, silty, peaty, chalky, and loamy, right? And so understanding your soil, whether you're growing flowers, whether you're growing vegetables, whatever it is, understanding your soil is always the first step. And
I'm going to do this again. Now you're still on this first slide. So now I think you actually mean to be farther along.
Oh, wait, I'm not.
It's not advancing.
Oh, at all? Yeah. I'm on like the 6th slide.
Okay. So why don't I share your PDF?
Oh, my screen sharing was paused. Oh no.
Oh, sorry.
How did that happen?
Try that again.
Oh my gosh. You guys are just like, what the heck is she referring to? It's loading.
Technology is a wonderful thing.
I just sent Betsy a message like, I'm a farmer, not a tech person. I'm reminded of this every day.
Do you want me to share mine since it doesn't seem to want to come up there?
Start from beginning.
Because now we're not seeing your slides at all. Oh, there it says loading. There. Okay, now it's the full screen. So now can you advance?
Boom.
Yay, okay.
Soil? I talked about all this juicy stuff. What makes healthy soil? I talk about this too. Boom, boom. And let's be here together. So I just wanted to, so whatever you're growing, you still have to get to know the type of soil. And even within each genre, whatever you're growing, there's always going to be like preferences, right? So whatever, it's like just different types of personalities, right? The plants desire. So the more you get to know your soil through samples and tests and just feeling it and growing it and spending time with your soil, the more you can understand, how to amend it, shift the environment, and adapt. So I really like to share this one because it's like, every there's just a blend. It's not like you can just most of the time, right, exist in solely one type of soil. And even in different parts of your garden, sometimes, my main flower garden I'm in right now it's pretty much the same, I would say, through across the acreage of it. But where I was growing more recently before that, it was oh my God, it would change like a lot throughout the whole, all my annuals. So yeah, it's never, like, it's always good to just not assume. Yeah, so this is like the more so the texture of your soil, obviously, right? Clay is like completely different than sand. And you can improve your soil health by taking steps to improve the aggregate stability and penetration resistance. So you want it to be able to breathe, but also, hold structure and drain. Okay, so reducing tillage, these are like the main things that you really want to think about if you're feeling you need to improve your soil. Improving drainage, that can be so reducing tillage can mean using different equipment, making sure that you're only stepping in or implementing tools and things in soil during certain times. I have a high clay content, so I have to be really careful of that, because if I run my tractor over or any equipment or step in certain places on the wrong time, or like spring is really hard, then I could be very detrimental to that aeration. Improving drainage, I have plans to put in some different drainage tiles this year just to help. I mean, I see now too, this with all today, the snow melt, it's like you're again reminded, pay attention to where things are pooling and ponding. Input or organic matter, like paying attention to that the more the better, more so now because of all these Asian jumping worms. Managing nutrients and pH, so getting tests through your local resource. Free of toxins, so knowing the history of your site can really help with that too if you're unsure if you haven't implemented toxins. And then cover cropping is the most like effective, I'll say, for one step that does so much. Cover cropping is amazing for that. But you really have to understand cover cropping if you're like in a limited season time, depending on what you're trying to do. So annual versus perennial, some cover crops you can mow and then just basically plant right into them. Some cover crops you have to absolutely not let go to seed. So understanding your season and choosing the right cover crop is huge, or then you're being a detriment. And then, so this is another criteria they'll call like, the factors of your soil health too. So soil armor, which we've just like, that structural integrity, minimizing soil disturbance, like we were saying before. And that again can be like, driving on your soil, or it could be putting your garden. This picture is a garden that's got crazy wind, so having different type of protective measures around your garden if you're in a really windy location, right, is huge. Or making sure you're not planting in an area where has major runoff, right? Plant diversity, having a lot of different types of marigolds, continual live plant roots, so like trying not to have naked soil or bare soil, and livestock integration, which is awesome. Also something you want to manage though. This is just me with in the beginning of this site last spring. I like to use the BCS. It's a smaller piece of equipment because of less soil compaction. So yeah, it's like your first time maybe in your site and where do I start, right? So your soil survey is huge, and getting your soil test. And then you can amend accordingly around, like, depending on what your results are. Around here, most people were always going to be adding lime. And then it's really good you can always apply fertilizers, different types of fertilizing through water too, but it's always better those can be washed out pretty quickly. So the more applications and amendments you load in there in the spring and the fall, the better. Also knowing that you're not, I've made the mistake of adding not cured animal compost and really thrown off the chemical nature of my soil in a bad way. Most annual Cutflowers are going to have similar preferences, but again, there might be some really, very specific. So just knowing if you're going to go heavy into one thing, just making sure that the types of environments that they're wanting. I mentioned the Asian jumping worms. I won't, because of time, won't go too deep into that. If you don't know about them, check them out. And then the history of your site. So, just what was it before? Was it farmland? Like what industrial? Like what sorts of things should you, pay attention to? this is a picture of my soil worksheet or soil map, right? So there's a bunch of different ones. I love it. I have it framed, obviously, right here in my office. This is a beginning of last year, so it'll be exciting to see, what will be this spring, right? So percent organic matter, 3.8, pretty good. You can get up a little higher with that. It's not bad, right? But pH is a huge one. 6.2 on the lower side. So that just really, represents the capability of the plants to absorb the right stuff. Soil building. This is, again, like this ever evolving dance and knowing when, and the more you get to know your site and the types of pull that the plants you're growing take. So sometimes, the way you rotate your garden, you might not need to give a certain area that much attention, but if you, are like heavily growing in one area, it's better to, think about giving back. Like whenever something is growing, you need to give back. So it's not like building a deck and just being like, oh yeah, every fall I'm going to stain it and I'm good. It's just a lot as straightforward as that. Like patience, right? Cover cropping, like I said, integration of animals, making sure like, what you're bringing into the site is appropriate. I like chickens because it's pretty safe. You're not going to burn anything really over you don't want to have animal waste that's too that's not cured and like too hot. I mentioned all this. Reduce and limit compaction. Living mulch. I love living mulch. It's using sort of like spaces where walkways and to just continue to grow things and not maybe just have like some wood chips. Sometimes people also like, and that's totally fine. I don't mind mowing the clover. So crop rotation and organic matter. How much time do I have?
You have about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So, yeah, the soil health, like just to recap, I mentioned soil armor, minimizing soil disturbance, plant diversity, continual plant and root, and livestock integration. Healthy soil, right, is going to have good drainage, proper till, sufficient depth for crop growth, minimal population of pests and disease. And that's something that, if a lot of growers will agree that the more sustainable and holistic, well-rounded your soil is, the less pests and disease you're going to have. If you're just constantly combating something, diseases are natural, pests are natural, but if you're just, in this endless really imbalance, then it's probably something to do with your soil. Large population of beneficial insects, sufficient exchangeable nutrient supply, and resilience to adverse conditions, right? So this, the last couple of years have been a strong testament to soil, like a couple of years, no water, we were all in drought, how certain types of soil will hold water stronger. Last year, if you didn't have good drainage, you were totally screwed. There was standing water like everywhere, even in places that normally would have strong drainage. And now, should I be looking at the chat or is this okay?
No, I'm paying
attention. Awesome.
In fact, I'm mostly posting.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh yeah, I meant to do the link. Yeah. So when you're considering soil, physical, chemical, and biological, and then spiritual, which I didn't know how far you guys wanted to get into that realm, but I recommend always considering the spiritual aspects of your garden and your soil. It's just magic. Like, how is there not a spiritual essence? So the physical, you want to think about things, not just being like, not everything can change. Some are just going to be inherent to your site. But also, try what you can. Drainage, put in some low-key drainage tiles, or maybe you want to rent a you have an excavator, you want to rent mini X for the day and really help drain your site better. The water availability, right? So maybe it's redesigning your garden to be able to receive water differently. A lot of permaculture practices, soil or aggregate stability, adequate organic matter. So yeah, always, again, inputting, putting that things that will withstand. Soil structure goes right into that. And compaction. So again, making sure that you know when you're moving around your garden and not being destructive unknowingly. Biological complex network. So a lot of that unseen stuff, you can see worms and different bugs and things like that, but there's a lot of microorganisms down there you can't even see, but you got to trust they're there and to continue to give them an environment to thrive in. Highly variable and always changing for sure. So organic matter is actually, like there's different parts of it. So there's live, obviously, like your plants, there's dead, that's in the process of decomposing, very dead. It's all important, right? So, and then chemical, those nutrients, thinking about the things on your soil sample. And again, most things are going to have, when I first started, there was never even really Cutflowers as an option to say, like, I'd like to understand my soil test in the context, in the lens of Cutflowers. But now it seems like I've heard way more of, highlighting that. But I have always, followed regiments around a lot of the vegetable production, annual at least, and it's felt sufficient so far. But it's like, I'm sure there's always specifics and exceptions. This is just an example of just a little drain I had to do this spring. I had to do a bunch of those little ones, and then I'll fill them in I'll have to redo them, obviously, but I have a lot of these little channels around now. Yes, I'll just keep moving. I talked about those. These are just examples of some like fall bed. I'm sorry, the quality looks so bad for that one. Yikes. Fall bed preparation. So there's a lot of different ways. So a lot of people like the lasagna layering, like the cardboard that will biodegrade, different layers of compost, mulch, things like that. This might be an example of something that you're growing in maybe like in the future, not necessarily the next year, or it could be. Straw is another great one. It helps, minimize the effects of the weathering of whatever your next season is, probably winter, right? So especially if it's a year where we don't have a lot of snow, it's really good to have snow, but if the wind is whipping and just all sorts of stuff all year, that process of thaw freeze, that can do a lot to your soil. So covering it, like the tarp is another great example. It's like vulnerable, so biological, talking about organic matter. These are my chicken tractors. I move around. See, I built them the width of my bed, 2 beds actually. And so, because the chickens love the clover, so I didn't want to cheat them out of not being able to eat the rows. So I just move these little tractors around and they get a bunch of different stuff. And this is my IPM, or my hope for managing the Asian jumping worms I have in the garden. Yes, and in the chemical way, just maybe taking another test, understanding any inputs you have and how they can adjust. And then I just want to include some pictures or some images I really liked. So just some of these unseen things that there is a lot of other bugs and things that aren't beneficial. But I just love, there's just so much going on underneath. And yeah, it's just like, it's obviously a whole thing. The soil horizons, I didn't know how much I wanted to maybe put a slide about it, but I didn't, but just to give you a visual of there's, like obviously different layers. So understanding that, there's that you don't need to, that's why people talk about the difference between, you know, like a really deep, not having to plow all the time, or taking those really deep upheavals, right, to sort of keep the integrity of those layers. And then this is just me as a little youngster, and a couple of years ago, and just the richness of, you know, the power of what soil can create for you. You know, it's just like the color, the plants, the food, yeah, the fiber, right? It's just such amazing foundation for all of life. And yeah, does anyone have any questions? I wanted to end a little early just in case. And if you had questions about you know, specifically to Cutflowers, I wanted to leave some for that too.
Anyone can put questions in the chat if they have them. I did have a question earlier that maybe goes to Caitlin, but in terms of aster yellows, and have you seen aster yellows on your marigolds? I did put in a resource on aster yellows. It's pretty dramatic if you have it, because it's a virus, and so you get really twisted petals. So I'm guessing that if you don't say, oh yes, I have, you probably haven't, and that's a good thing. It's a leafhopper carried disease.
No, I haven't. I've grown one variety that's consistently stumped, and I'm not quite sure, like the petals just doesn't launch at all. And I wonder if that's, I'm not quite sure. I tried the same seed packet 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
And
something that's
maybe it's just that, but yeah, I have not seen. Amazing thing about marigolds is, I was going to put in the chat that marigolds will take care of those nematodes for you. But they are pretty resilient to most diseases.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Speaking of diseases, we're going to go now on to Juliana. So if you want to stop sharing, Hannah, we'll move to her presentation.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. As Betsy said, I'm Juliana González. I am a PhD candidate at the Cornell Plant Pathology and Plant Microbiology program. So I was invited very kindly by Betsy and by Marjorie Daughtry to just come here and talk a little bit about the different pathogens that can mess up our Cutflowers. I'm not sure what the different levels of, familiarity with this are, in the audience. So I just prepared it for like a very general overview of the different groups of pathogens that can make flowers sick, and then also a bit of an emphasis on a couple of diseases that I was told were, of importance and interest right now. So I'm just gonna go through. If you have any questions, or Betsy, if you see anything in the chat that I can clarify, just let me know. But otherwise, I hope to not take the full time, so that you can ask questions either for me or for Hannah or Gillian. So I'm gonna start. Just as a very general overview of cutflower diseases, and honestly just diseases in general for different plants, we need to understand the different components that allow for a disease to happen. So I have a picture here of a very sick and diseased flower, but for that to occur, you will have different situations that need to happen. And that's why we use in plant pathology this thing here that we call the triangle, the disease triangle, or the triangle of disease, which originally was designed and composed of 3 different things, and then we added time as a 4th component, and I'm going to explain why is that important. And this might seem very obvious, that me telling you need a pathogen in your field to get a disease, but it's not that obvious when you stop and think that pathogens can have different levels of pathogenicity. And they can be either more or less aggressive, and conditions in your field can actually make them more or less aggressive. So it's important that that is one of the components that we have here, a pathogen that is aggressive enough to cause disease in your crop. Then we also need, of course, a host plant. And in that case, we need a host that's susceptible. So it's gonna allow disease to happen, basically. And this is something important also for management, because one of the things that I'm gonna mention later on is that you need one of the options that you can use is that you need resistant plants to help control disease in your field. So of course, in this case, for disease to happen, you need a host that is susceptible. And then the last thing, which is very important, but sometimes people dismiss it, is the environment. If you do not have a conducive environment for the disease to develop, then nothing will happen. Even if you have, an aggressive pathogen and a susceptible host, you need a good environment for the situation to go. And then, as I mentioned, time was included later on as a fourth component. And it's also important for us in terms of management and how to handle with these issues, because some things can happen overnight. Some things will take days or weeks to get to a point that they are, bad, really bad, and we have to manage them. So time is something that we have to have in mind and understand the different things that can affect our specific crop, how fast they develop, how much time we have actually to tackle that. And then another concept that we thought was important to bring today is that not any pathogen can infect any plant. Some pathogens do have a very broad range of hosts that they can affect, which are, worse for us because we wouldn't have that many options of things that we can switch or change in the field to control them. But there's other pathogens that are much more specific to, to the host that they affect. And in that case, we can, for example, rotate with a different crop that's not going to be affected by that pathogen that has been around. And as I said, nothing of this will be important if you don't have the environmental conditions that lead to that. And that's exactly where most of our management strategies come from, trying to break that environment and not make it a good environment for the pathogen to thrive. So I'm just, as I said, I'm going to go through the three main groups of pathogens that affect cut flowers. The first one and the biggest one are fungi. Fungal diseases can cause different things in the flowers. You can have spots on the leaves or even in the petals. Here, for example, we have a picture of mildew growing on dahlia, and I'm going to talk about that in detail at the end because I know it's a very important one right now. But you can see how the leaves are basically covered with the fungal disease. And then we can also have just like spots like this one's here of an anthracnose fungus. We can also have moldy growth in the plant. So like literally we're going to see the fungi growing, as for example, what happens with botrytis. This is a marigold actually. So I'm going to go back to botrytis in the end as well. And then we have other groups. This one is, for example, a picture of a rust that I'm going to talk about in a minute in the next slide. And then in management terms, very generally for fungal diseases, I'm going to break it down a bit, but just first so that we understand what are the things that we can do for them. The most important actually is just good sanitation practices. And I know that, might sound very obvious for you all because you're going to be as clean as you can in your crops, but sometimes we don't understand why is it important to do all those things. And I think just reminding ourselves of what makes the pathogen have a better environment and then how we can do to break that. One of the things is just removing damaged plants, because if you have a plant that has a part of the plant at least that has already been affected by the fungal disease, then the fungi will just survive there. Even if you leave it in the soil, you can think, oh, that's not gonna make a difference. It can definitely make a difference and just pass it to your healthy plants. Clean up the materials and the tools and the things that you use to, for example, harvest. And then humidity is gonna be a big one, and I'm gonna be repeating that. Sorry if it sounds redundant, but it's just very important. There are some pathogens that need a certain amount of humidity to be able to infect. So if that's in our control, then that's definitely one thing that we have to remember. And of course, we always have pesticides, both protectants, so just in the surface, or systemic, which are the ones that go inside the plant and kill inside the plant. And I know that's not the ideal solution, but in some cases where it's dramatic, they could be an option. So just in more detail, the three main groups of fungal diseases that can affect flowers, we have rusts, as I mentioned in the beginning, and we usually see them like this. This is one on point vetch actually. And I wanted just to break down what are we seeing in our plants, and then what does that mean? So in this case, what we're seeing are usually the spores of the fungi. You can have in drusts many different types of spores. Some actually have like 5 different types for the whole disease cycle to happen. So that might make it different and difficult to understand, because you can see different things across the time of the disease, and making your crop sick. And it's the same thing, it's just in a different stage. So that's why we included here. They can have different colors from orange to red or even brown, but they do look like these raised spots, usually on the lower part of the leaves. There's many species of rust that can affect flowers, but the most common species of rust in general, the most common genus, sorry, is Puccinia. And they are usually host specific, which is good in terms that we know when to expect them. But in some cases, they can have reservoirs, which means that they can be on a plant that they're not going to make it sick, but they're just going to hang out there until there's another plant where they do. It works as a host, and they're going to move there later on. And then we have fungi pathogens that cause anthracnose, which is this specific type of leaf spots. This is, of course, just dead tissue, so we call it necrotic leaf spots. And they usually generate this circular or concentric symptoms. This photo here is for Coletotrichum, in this case Gloeosporoides, but you have different species. But that's one of the most popular fungi causing this type of disease. And again, it can affect different hosts. And then you have other leaf spot causing fungi, Alternaria, Septoria. Maybe you have heard those names in the past dealing with the situations. But there's usually just spots in the leaves, sometimes in the petals. And of course, that's something that you wouldn't want on your flowers. So yeah, just important to mention that what you're seeing is actually the fungal, the fungi growing, the fungal growth. And now to management. I'm gonna be general in this management guidelines, but at the end we'll have different contacts of people at Cornell that you can contact to ask more specific about your problems right now or in the future. But I just wanted to make a table that we could just like a general way to go to and see the differences between the different groups of pathogens. So when you're thinking of managing a pathogen in your field, the usual approach is to either control the current disease, which I have here at number 1, or control it or prevent it to going to, for example, healthy plants or other crops. So that's why I use these 2 numbers to differentiate the different approaches in here. For rust, we would want resistant cultivars. Usually this can actually also work as number 2. As I mentioned, people can use systemic fungicides or protectants. But it's important that if you use systemic fungicides, you alternate between them, because that helps not favor resistance generation as much. Although, of course, as I mentioned, it's not usually the ideal way to go. But what it is important and it's essential is to control humidity. Rust spores are going to move from one plant to the other very easily with water. So usually having a controlled irrigation process and not like splashing things around will be very important. Anthracnose generating fungi are similar, and leaf spots as well. But for this one, I thought it was important to include that since so many things can cause leaf spots, it's usually necessary to have a diagnosis of what you specifically have in your crop before jumping to use any chemical or any other approach that's different to just managing humidity or sun or that type of thing in a crop. And then something that seems very easy or maybe obvious to think through is just spacing the plants correctly. Not just logically, if you have one plant that is sick and you have one that's healthy right next to it, like very close together, then it will be easier for a pathogen to move on, even if you're controlling water or humidity levels. But if you have appropriate space between them, then you can aid, make it harder for the pathogen to do that. So that's fungal diseases, and I'm gonna go back at the end just to more detailedly go through a couple. But again, as a general overview, the other group that cause diseases in flowers are bacteria. Bacteria usually cause leaf spots. So that's interesting because you can see, you will see a leaf spot in the crop and you have to ask yourself, does that look like a fungal disease or does that look like a bacteria? Because the management will be, slightly different for them. So usually the leaf spots of fungal diseases, as I showed you before, are like concentric circles, right? Or things that, can break through across the leaf. That's because fungi have structures that allow them to pierce through the leaf, while bacteria don't. So that's why bacterial leaf spots are usually going to be angular. This I didn't find out what disease it was, but it looked very easy to show you in here that it's like the leaf spot will be limited by the veins of the leaf. So bacteria cannot really pierce through that easily. It's just gonna be limited by that. While fungi can grow everywhere, so you can see it go through the veins or make circles around. It wouldn't care. While bacteria will be more contained. That doesn't mean that the disease is less harmful. It just means that it will look different. Sometimes it's hard to, to identify those differences, but just having in mind that they generally look different can help, just for an initial understanding of what's going on in the crop. So yeah, so you will usually have those differences. In this case, we have Xanthomonas and Zinnia, and you can see how it's delimited by the big leaf veins here. And then it's hard to tell you like examples of bacteria that can cause this because really there's many of them. So I'm just gonna say that the two bigger groups of bacteria that can cause leaf spots and flowers are Pseudomonas and Xanthomonas. That's just because these groups are very big and they can cause disease in so many different plants. So of course they are also included for cutflowers. But just to mention that they usually are related to this. And then something that I thought was useful and can probably be useful, for example, in the field, is that you can use a very simple test to get an idea if that leaf spot that you're seeing is fungal or bacterial, aside from looking at how the leaf spots go, which is called bacterial streaming. And for this, we literally just cut through the lesion. Let's say that I'm doing it in here. I'm just gonna cut like this here, and then put the leaf on water. If it's a bacterial disease, you will usually see bacteria going out from the leaf into the water like this here. So that's why we call this streaming. If it's a fungal disease, you wouldn't see that. So, not there will obviously be some exceptions, but it's a general approach that you can do very quickly to get an idea of what's going on in those leaves. In terms of management, as I said, I'm just going to add bacterial and then viruses, which are the ones that come next. Humidity and wetness is also important. And in this case, they're going to be moving the bacteria themselves. So bacteria can travel in drops of water from a plant to the other plant. Previously, when we talked about fungi, we were more thinking about the spores or the conidia, which are these structures the fungi use to disseminate. In this case, bacteria will be moving themselves. And they need water even to move on top of a plant. So it's not only from one plant to the other, but if they get to a plant and they're looking for a way to get in, they will usually use water for that. So it's very important. People can also use bactericides to treat them. Copper is actually something that people use a lot. Lately, it has been seen that progressively there's more and more resistance to copper, especially from the bacteria of the Pseudomonas group that I was mentioning. But it's important to mention anyway because it has been used for a lot of years. And as with fungal diseases, getting a diagnosis is important. So you can do these tricks that I showed you for an initial approach, but then contacting somebody that can help you get to really what's going on could help a lot. And then we have viruses. Viruses are interesting because they don't even have cells. They just are protein and genetic material. So I figure that maybe you have that idea more clearly now that we have been in a viral pandemic for 2 years. But basically, it's important to mention that viruses are very different to the other pathogens. They cannot survive on their own. So they cannot survive outside in the environment for very long. They need to be either inside the host, so the plant in this case, or inside a vector. And for vector, we can talk about, insects, nematodes, other animals, where virus can get in it, move to a different plant, for example, or to a different crop even, and then generate disease there. So what we see in the case of viruses are, can be different things. One, I guess the most common are mosaic patterns, like this one, which actually looks really beautiful. And I know some people like that, so like they prefer how the flowers look when they're diseased. But of course, we have to be careful of not providing a space where you can just disseminate to other people's crops. But this is usually what you could see in the leaves or the flowers. There's also other viruses that can cause ring spot, curly tops in the leaves, or even stunting. This is a picture of a chrysanthemum that, the one that's diseased, you will see it much smaller than the other one. Um, and what is going on inside when you're seeing the symptoms is basically the virus is moving through the different cells of the plant. And that's where you're going to be seeing how it changes. Either the petals change color or the leaves change color, like this. There's some testing available for certain viruses. There's companies, in this moment, I remember Agdia test strips, but I know there's others that you can purchase if you know or you're expecting maybe that a certain virus affects your crop. They're usually test strips, so it's very similar to what we do with COVID testing for antigen. Using antigen tests is similar, but in this case with the plants, you can literally just like take a piece of the diseased leaf, grind it down, and then put it in contact with the strip, which is going to do the same as the antigen tests do for us for COVID. It's just looking for the proteins of the virus and telling us if we have it or not. So it's good because you can do it in the field. It's not so expensive, but of course we don't have that for any single virus everywhere. So that's something to take into account. And as I mentioned, and I'm going to say it again in management, controlling the vector is very important because it's basically the one that's taking the virus to our flowers. So inside the vector, the virus can either persist or not persist, which means that in some cases, let's say that we have an insect that's feeding on a flower, it takes a virus, and then if it's not going to persist in it, as soon as the insect gets to another flower, the virus will exit and it will, get into that plant. But in the ones that they persist, sometimes they take some time inside the vector before being released on a different flower, even if the vector has been feeding for a while. So depending on the virus that you have, it's important to have this in mind because it can also help management understand the timing of how soon will it transmit from one flower, for example, to another. And again, when they are inside the vector, they can circulate or not, which means some of them need to go around inside the insect before being able to infect another plant, but others don't. And usually vectors, as I said, we have insects like aphids, thrips, whiteflies, which are also a problem on their own, right? If we're caring for flowers inside a greenhouse, we're gonna be worried if we get whiteflies. So I didn't include in the presentation like pests in detail just because of time. But the people that I'm going to mention at the end are also working on this all the time. So you can contact them if you have that sort of issue. As same with nematodes, which can be a problem by themselves and also can take viruses as an added problem. So as management, as I mentioned, we need to control the vector, that's for sure. Dispose of infected plants, they can really survive there. Imagine that honestly, you cannot survive outside a plant. You're going to hold on to any type of remaining material that you can find to leave, and then clean everything, tools, working space, everything. Oh, and something that I didn't mention before, but it is important honestly for all of this, is the use of certified plants or seeds. So this is a little bit different than the resistant varieties. In this case, it's just plants that the company that's selling them to us is, guaranteeing that they are free of the pathogen, in this case, viruses. So as long, up to the moment where they give them to you, they should be free of everything, and then you can handle them carefully, grow them carefully so that they don't get infected with anything. And lastly, I'm just gonna, quickly go through a few examples of things that I was told were important right now in New York. One of them are mildews. So mildews, you might remember I mentioned them in the first slide because they are usually along with fungal diseases, specifically powdery mildew. So we have two types, powdery and downy, and I'm gonna show downy in a minute. But powdery is caused by different fungi. It usually looks like powder on the leaves. Well, you can sort of see it in this one here, but I think the other one will be more specific. So literally, you just see powder on the leaves. That you're seeing is precisely the fungal growth on the upper surface of the leaves and stems usually. Also, in some cases, on the other side of the leaf, you can get discoloration, and that sometimes happens first. So it can also be a way to sort of get an idea that something's going on with the crop. And then this is a picture of one of the fungi that can cause it, and they're structures that are going to be growing on top of the leaf. In this case, it's a structure called a clisotecium, but the fact is that it's just releasing spores. And this just to remind you that since this is a fungi, you will have to control the spores as well. And that's one of the main ways it spreads. They can travel by wind or by water. So both controlling humidity and also just controlling the space where you're growing it will be important if you see, signals of this in your flowers. In terms of environment, they are usually benefited from cool, humid nights and warm, dry days. So that means that part of spring here would be exactly these set of environment that they would need. So that's important to know what moments of the year this could be more prevalent in crops than in others. And interestingly, they do not require free water on top of the leaves to grow this type of mildew. Of course, water is important for it. It can move on the droplets, but different to the next one that I'm going to mention, which does require water, this one doesn't. So controlling, water will be important for transmission, but in this case, they don't really require it to grow on the leaves. And as I said, seasonally, the situation with this will change. They can survive in leftovers of your plants over the winter, and even dormant in some cases. So that's something to take into account. And then downy, which is the other one I mentioned, this one is not so easy to identify. It's not so evident as the other one. And this one is technically caused by an oomycete, which are a group of pathogens that are very similar to fungi. They look similar to fungi. You have them in the lab and they grow very similarly, but they're not the same. They have differences in their wall. They have differences in their genetics. So that's why we have them in different groups. And in this case, what you will usually see is this type of lesions, more like, it can change from light green to yellow. So it can also be confused with just a leaf spot of a different type. But you can also get sporulation on the lower side of the leaf, which can, aid you to understand what is really going on. And in this case, sick leaves usually drop from the plant. So when they're sick enough, they're just gonna fall down, which is important for management because we have to remove them in order for them not to be, a reservoir for other plants, healthy plants to get sick. And this is how they would look. For example, in the microscope, we'll have the spores able to move from one plant to the other. Same thing, wind, water, and then the environment is very similar. But as I said, this one does need water to grow. So more important to control that. And it has a type of oospores that can get very thick in their wall. And that means they can overwinter even by themselves in the soil. So important to take care of the soil after, a season where you have this disease going on. And then the last thing I was going to say is I was told that dahlia, mildew on dahlia actually is a concern right now. This is usually powdery mildew. So that will be the first one that I mentioned. This is the pathogen that causes it. It looks just like talcum on it. But of course, you will prefer to have healthy dahlias, right? Like this one's here. And interestingly, this doesn't usually kill the plant. But of course, they're going to make it less healthy. They're going to limit the plant's growth. And of course, it's not something that you want to have in your business. And again, same things to do. Management is very similar, but it is important to monitor the plants. I was going to mention that because sometimes these things can seem that they happen overnight, but they actually have been showing symptoms before. It's just that you have to look at them very carefully. So I just added this here. It's the same thing that I've said, so I'm not going to pause on it. But if anybody wants the slides later on, Betsy can pass them to you. But again, just remember the differences between both of them. Oh, and for the powdery one, I didn't knew this before doing this presentation, but talking with Marjorie made me realize it's important not to over fertilize your crop, because if you do, then you will get healthy parts of the plant sprout, more constantly. And for powdery, the mildew will move to these plants much more easily, to these parts much more easily than it will do to maybe older parts of the plant. And this is the last part, botrytis, which is also a fungi. Also was told that it was very important right now, so I just wanted to mention it in detail. We usually call it gray mold because it exactly looks like that. You can see that this roses here very thick, and it's actually very important in roses. And that's also because it can affect pre and post harvest, which means that you can see it in your field, before harvesting your plants, but then you can also think that everything is okay. You harvest them, maybe you sell them, and then at some point during the process of transportation, or even after they have reached their destination, they start showing symptoms. That's because the pathogen can be in there without, you seeing actually something is going on until the conditions are good enough for it to do it. And that's bad, right? Because you wouldn't want that to happen after you sell them. So usually you will see irregular spots on the leaves, but then as the disease progresses, you will literally see the fungi growing, and it will get really awful and actually just very powdery, in the sense that the spores are going to be a lot and they can move easily. This is how they look in the microscope. Actually, it's a very cute assembly, but they're very harmful and they can move very easily. As I said, they spread air, water very easily, and in this case, water is also needed for them to germinate. So maybe you have, a rose that the amount of water on it or the humidity around it is not enough for it to germinate. You sell it, and then weeks later, when it is in an environment that's more humid, then it does germinate. And same thing, important to keep humidity down, leaves from touching the soil also, and then scout for that tissue and just remove it. You can even put them inside, plastic bags or something to separate the parts that are diseased from the rest. Very important. So I think I'm close to time, and I'm just going to stop here because, we want to take some questions. This is my Cornell email. My main work at Cornell is not in flowers, but I have done a couple of things with Marjorie. So I can help a little bit. But of course, these people down here, Marjorie, Elizabeth, and Brian, are going to be the best contacts that you can have for this. So feel free to email them. And they also asked me to mention that the Cornell guidelines for IPM on, greenhouse crops and herbaceous ornamentals, you can find them in this link. That will contain almost all of this information, and maybe much more specific on the different types of things that you can do for each pathogen or disease that you're dealing with. So just wanted to mention that. And yeah, I am happy to answer any questions if there are any.
You did a fantastic job. You got a lot of information there.
A lot.
And also,
Yeah.
I apologize for mispronouncing your name. It's
Juliana.
Juliana.
That's fine. That's fine. In Spanish, it's Juliana, but if you translate it, it's Juliana. So people just call me both ways, and I'm fine with that.
And I've only ever seen it written down. So it's nice to meet you also. That was a fantastic talk, and thank you. Lots and lots of information there. And these are being recorded, so people will be able to listen again and look again and see the information for all three of them. So there is one question here about rose rosacea. I'm not sure what rose rosacea is. Amy, do you want to say something more specific? You can unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, it's Amy. So the rose rosacea, I think it's a virus, and we first had it a few years ago, and I just don't know how one controls it. Or
is it rose rosette?
Yeah, I
Rose
guess
rosette.
it is. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. I could be. Yeah.
It is a virus. It is, yeah, and it is pretty dramatic when it comes in. So you'll see, you get kind of a witch's broom where all the buds break, and the shoots are kind of reddish, and the flowers, yeah. So I don't know if you have any information on that, Juliana. It is a virus, or a virus or a mycoplasma, I believe.
Yeah, I was looking at it here. But yeah, apparently it's one of those things that there's no a straightforward cure. You just have to manage other things for it. But I'm sure that we can look at that into detail, right?
It's
Let's
carried,
see.
yeah, and it's vectored. It's one that's vectored by an area mite, which are very small. And so they're often hard to see that you've got them. And it is one where most of the management that I know of, they're finding a little bit of resistance. They're looking for resistance, but most of the management is like pruning off the parts that show it and bagging them and taking them away. And so that's one of the things too. Juliana was good about saying things like, okay, remove this plant material, but also often you don't want to let it just drop. So if you just let something that's got botrytis on it drop, it will still mature and the spores will fly around and it will spread more. So there are times when actually bagging the part that you're removing is really important. But you're right, it's relatively new and seems to be spreading. You can see it in wild roses. You can see it pretty much anywhere they've got roses.
Thank you.
See if I can find another a resource on it, but I did just put the one in for the hopefully this is the correct one. Yeah, for the greenhouse crops. It's interesting. We do not yet have a specific guidelines for cut flowers. Maybe someday that will happen, but the information is in the greenhouse guidelines, but you do have to check the labels to make sure that what you're looking at is actually labeled for cut flowers, which New York State, we always have to make sure we have the crop and the situation. So are there any other questions? Caitlin said the breaking disease in the tulips was the basis of the tulipomania, where people would spend thousands of dollars on tulips that had those breaks where the colors were not all solid. Let's see. Okay, Gemma, do you have information on the CCA sign in?
Yeah, you can just use it if you want CCA credits. Just scan the QR code there. That's about it. I just wanted to get that up in case people start logging off.
That's right. And if you need the DEC credits, do they need the link for that also, the new link?
Got it.
There you go. All right. And I'm going to put in a link again for the Cutflower listserv if anyone's interested, but we still have a couple of seconds or minutes anyway for if anyone has questions. Thank you. It was a really nice mix of, oops, that looks odd, of talks and different styles and different information. So thank you. Also, if people have topics that they would like to see in future Cutflower sessions at the Producers Expo, please send those along. You can send them to me. In fact, I can put my email address in here if you want it. You can send them to Steve. You can send them to anybody you can find who will get them to me. What else can we tell people? If not, thank you all very much to our speakers and also to the audience. And thank you for putting information in the chat. And we'll leave this up a while because everybody has to get into the DEC link and that sometimes takes time. If anyone wants to unmute and put in information for the good of the order, that'd be great.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.